for having me again. I appreciate being here. So just to reintroduce a little bit, my name is Denise Folsom. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, registered play therapist, and the owner of the Legacy House in Panama City. Also, if the face looks a little familiar, I worked for the Coalition for about 7 years. I was the one that came out and did all the itters and ekkers. So you can feel about me how you felt about me. So last week we talked about the impact of distressing events on brain development. This week we're going to focus a little bit more on infants and toddlers, just because how trauma impacts them is very different than how it would an older child. And so again, it's in touch what impacts infants and toddlers. So one of the things to really think about, and we talked a little bit about last week, is trauma. So we have to be, I'm going to just talk, kind of refresh about capital T traumas and lowercase t traumas. When we think about trauma, we almost always think about, assaults. We think about the hurricane. We think about all of those kinds of things. And it can be, what we just went through, tornado and COVID, the impact that it's had on our environment would definitely be one of those capital T traumas. But we also have to really pay attention to what we call, that's those uppercase, the capital T traumas. The lowercase t traumas are going to be more subtle. They're disturbing, it's a disruption, and it can be just in a belief like I'm safe. I know related to the hurricane, a lot of us thought, this couldn't happen here. And so even if you didn't go through the main part of the hurricane, your belief that I'm safe now is different. And so that can be one of those lowercase t traumas. It can also be an accumulation of things over time, a divorce, multiple moves, bullying. So all of those things can be a capital T trauma or a lowercase t trauma, but especially for children, they definitely have an impact on things. And so if you look at your screen, it gives you a definition, a little bit of trauma, but at the bottom it talks about that any of these, the lowercase t traumas or the capital T traumas, really can impact how young children bond. And in here it talks about bonding with parents, but that also caregiver, grandparents, Sunday school teachers, any of the adults in their life. When they have a trauma, it kind of pauses their development. It pauses the development in language and physical skills and social skills, managing emotions. When I deal with an adult who has had a traumatic event in childhood, their response when triggered will almost be exactly the same as the age that it occurred. So I could be working with a 50-year-old who had a trauma at 4, and when that same kind of thing is the same kind of event is triggered, you'll see some of the behaviors mimic the 4-year-old. And it's because that trauma, that injury was not healed. And so it's one of the things to really pay attention to. The best example I can give it, if you'll notice when a baby is learning how to walk, they almost always stop learning how to talk. The babbling goes down, the development of language goes down. So it's almost like they could only do one thing at a time. And trauma kind of does that. It'll do a disruption, especially in babies and toddlers, on where they are. So they may be establishing a bond, something happens, and it pauses it. And then once they kind of learn, and hopefully they have a support system that'll help them go through that trauma and come out on the other side, then development will pick back up. And there are times that you'll have an injury to that specific area. You'll notice people may not be afraid of thunderstorms after the hurricane, but they're afraid of wind. And when you hear that wind, your body just naturally responds. Well, the adults are not the only ones. It definitely happens to children. And so when you're looking at how trauma affects babies and toddlers, it's a little bit different because they're very, very sensitive. So I want you to think about the things that you're sensitive to. Well, these children are very sensitive to some specific things. Problems affecting their caregiver. What's the mood? What's the body language? What's the attentiveness? What's the stress level on that caregiver? Those children will feel that, and that's called attunement. If they're separated from a caregiver, so think about these children who were in childcare, they've had that same teacher, that same caregiver for a little while, or there's a baby and a toddler at home, and now there's more people in the home, or they're not at childcare anymore, or that teacher's not there anymore. So the separation from a caregiver can cause two issues. One is the distress of that separation itself. Like, where is my person? Who is that person who held me a certain way, who fed me a certain way? Where's that smell? And also, now I don't know what to do with myself. I know that when this person was here, it was okay to be quiet, or it was okay to suck my thumb, or it was okay to cry. But what about this person who is a completely different person? That baby and that toddler does not know how to have safety and understanding, and that just they don't have that same nurturing. So that's kind of a double impact on that one. And also, if you think about right now, they need to, there's a definite disruption in what's happening in their household, their child care center. A lot of these children know something happened, but they don't know what happened. And then, so if you'll look at also the last one on that slide talks about it disrupts the development of the bond. So when I talked about like an injury, this is like a development injury. So if they were in the stage of beginning to attach to caregivers and kind of getting into their rhythm, and they're used to the sounds of a child care center, which can be very different from home. They're getting used to, you know, the smells and the expectations. And now all of a sudden, now they're back home, and they're back home in a completely different environment, a completely different schedule. All of that just disrupts that bond, because babies and toddlers do not understand where that caregiver went. You know, we talked a lot about that right after the hurricane, when, you know, all the schools changed and it took so long to get some of the child care centers going. And we have an understanding as adults on what happened to them, but they don't. And so with COVID, it's almost the opposite a little bit, to where now we have a disruption, and sometimes there's more people in the home. And the hurricane, at least in my experience, people's kind of scattered. And in COVID, people have come home and having to stay home, but that doesn't change the fact that it can be very distressful. And maybe the attentiveness and the attunement to the baby and the toddler aren't there. So here talks about the common reactions, and you're not going to see a lot of the major temper tantrums like you would with maybe a preschooler or a 2-year-old. We talked a little bit last week about fight, flight, and freeze. And so this is going to kind of fall along that reaction to a traumatic event. You know, some people really start kind of fighting it. They react and they explode, and some will just avoid it. They flight, they get away from it, they get out of the room, they avoid conflict at all cost. And with babies and toddlers, you might see some of these things. It's almost like they go back in a little bit, they cocoon a little bit. So you're going to see high levels of distress when separated. So they may have had some separation anxiety. They may have cried when the caregiver left them. This is going to take it up a notch or two. It's going to be the higher levels. You're going to see kind of that frozenness. I put a picture on there. Sometimes babies just look like this and it can be content, but you're going to see that just kind of in their shell, it talks about having the appearance of being numb, not really showing their feelings. What we're going to do is we're going to look for a difference. We're going to look for a difference than the child before these things happened. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference in personalities. But they're also going to lose some playfulness. They might lose some of that cooing, just like I talked about before, that there's a disruption in development and they're just kind of in a paused state. If they were eating before, they may come back a little bit. You're going to see a shift in their eye contact, being much more difficult to soothe, harder to put to sleep. They're just kind of unsettled. And when you think about, now you have this baby and this toddler they're more difficult to calm. They're harder to nurture. They're harder to attune to. And now you have also a home that's under stress. And so it's one of those things that just makes a really bad infinity loop going. And you may also notice that they're going to slip back in some of their physical skills. Let's say they were starting to walk, and now you're going to notice they go back to crawling. They may seem clumsy. They may not be able to put things together how they were, or move things. They may have been able to hold a bottle, and now they can't seem to anymore. Honestly, it's because there was just a disruption in just the ability to tolerate all the things that are going on. Babies are very sensitive to just the distractions around them. So the main point of this webinar is really to look at what you can do. With infants and toddlers, you're not going to have the same interventions that you would have with a preschooler, with a school age, or even with an adult. With infants and toddlers, it's going to come down to consistency and repetition, and we're kind of going to go over what happens when that disruption occurs, because when you see the disruption and you know what to expect, it's a little bit easier to say, oh, well, then this is what I should do. So we're going to talk a little bit about attachment. I always say attachment that's my person. Those are my people. I know them and they know me. And so it's that emotional bond with another person. And it can be multiple as the child gets older and they have the ability to connect to more than one person. So that attachment, if it's a positive and a secure attachment, you're going to see physical, emotional, physiological, and cognitive development go forward. You're going to see that child can trust if they have a secure attachment. It's going to determine if they're positive or negative view on the world. And the most important piece is that attachment impacts all other relationships. It impacts what is going on with friends, with grandparents, with caregivers, and with peers. So when an infant experiences consistent care where their needs are met, there's 3 messages that really truly come across. I'm safe. So that is, when you think about just, if you were to say that to yourself, I'm safe. I know when the tornadoes came through the other day, it was a piece after it went through that I was looking at my daughter and I'm like, I'm safe. I know that. And there's just a contentment that happens in your body. I'm heard. That you're going to, that you know that baby's not acting how they normally act. You can see distress. You know the difference in the cries and the difference in the verbalizations and just the cooing. You know that difference. And then I'm valuable. And that means not only are you safe and I know you, I hear you, but I'm also going to do something about it. And you know that that baby can say, I'm safe. That person hears me speaking to them, whether it's through body language or sounds or just eye contact, but also they're valuable enough for somebody to come back and help take care of them. When we think the infants are one of the most vulnerable, of species. When you look at a giraffe immediately after giving birth, that giraffe knows, get up. And they can kind of manage on their own. But, when you have a very young infant, that's not true. And so when they have that secure attachment, which is what we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, that's the foundation that helps a child develop other relationships. So the stages of attachment, I think, are pretty cool if you kind of look at, I see some parents taking things personally. So this is really how somebody does attach. So there's pre-attachment. When you think about birth to 6 weeks, you've got kind of limited interactions and maybe, if you're going to feed me, then I pretty much like you. That's pretty much the requirements of an infant. Feed me, change me from birth to 6 weeks. 6 weeks to 7 months, that baby's going to go, oh, okay, so you're my people. And you've got maybe 1 or 2. It can be a teacher in a child care center. It can be a grandparent. It can be a parent. There's going to be a primary and maybe a secondary, but they're going to begin to kind of recognize that's my person. It gets into discriminate a little bit about 7 months. And this is kind of where you might get some moms or some dads who are upset about the other person, or even that they get upset with a child care provider because that infant is going to show a strong attachment to one specific caregiver. And that's actually a good thing, because when you look at the discrimination that takes to go, oh, so there's all of these people, but that one's mine. Then at 10 months, usually it evens out a little bit, and they're going to begin to be able to grow bonds with other caregivers. So the reason that I put this on there is I don't want anybody to take it personally when you see a young baby attached to 1 or 2 caregivers and then kind of come back to a 1 caregiver. And then by 10 months, Now they're able to have bonds with others. So it's just a developmental stage, rather than maybe a child having a preference for one person over another. This is actually an experiment most people have seen. If you haven't, I definitely encourage you to Google it and look at it. For me as a mom, teacher, caregiver, and all of those things, it was very disturbing. Basically, you see the mom on the right and the baby on the left. In the beginning, she is interacting with the baby, and then she just goes still-faced. She doesn't make any loud noises. She doesn't do anything disturbing, but you can watch this baby in this experiment go through all the things that this baby knows. Oh, well, this has worked before. If I cry, I get your attention. If I babble, I get your attention. If I make eye contact, I get attention. But when this person, the mom on the right, goes still faced, you can see the distress on the baby. So that is an experiment I wanted you to look at, but I wanted you to see one that may have a little bit more relatability. So I want to, that's probably something that looks familiar. So this is just a real quick video that I wanted you to see. You're seeing attunement right here, the dance between adult and baby. And this is something we see a lot. The phone between the adult and the baby, caregiver. I want you to watch the baby. Watch the baby try to get her attention. So you just saw an example of, honestly, what we see all the time, where there's electronic devices and things that are coming between what we hope to be attachment and attunement. For me, if you really look at the baby's reaction, the baby is like, okay, so before I looked at her and I was attuned to her, I was connected to her, we were attaching, I've made noises, I cooed a little, tried that. And finally you can see the baby physically starting to move, trying to get the caregiver's attention, and then finally started to cry. And so that's a piece where you're looking at, you saw attunement and attachment in the beginning, you saw the disruption, but then you saw that baby be able to be comforted. And so I wanted to kind of look at the 4 attachment styles, and mainly focusing on, you may be familiar with these, but looking at what you can do about them when you have these styles, because this really is developed very young. The age that we're talking about, that infant and toddler stages, is when you'll begin to see these attachment styles. So the reason I put this one up here, we're going to go through them, but I wanted you to look at the percentages. So 65% secure attachment, 20% avoidant, 10 to 15 ambivalent, and then 10 to 15 disorganized. So if you're a teacher, I want you to think about, this is probably pretty close to the children, the makeup of your classroom. You're probably going to have 65% of the infants and toddlers in your care have secure attachment. I have noticed that sometimes hurricanes and things like that can disrupt that attachment a little bit, but this is just across the US population. So it's kind of giving you an idea. And we don't need to go through each one here because I'm going to go through them. This is an important note when you're thinking about attachment. You also have to think about the baby's personality. Just for me, if any of you know me, I have three children. They are 19, 21, and 23. My oldest is a little bit more anxious. She is definitely slow to warm. It takes her a little while. Once she loves you, but it takes her kind of a little bit to adjust. My middle child has not really met a stranger. I call her my husband. We jokingly say the husband's the captain of the ship and I'm the cruise director. Well, she's right behind me on plane and stuff. She loves to go and do, and change doesn't bother her. Being a military child, she's like, when are we going? My oldest told my husband, I'm not making friends till you retire. And so just between those two who are only 19 months apart, we see personality. So when you're thinking about attachment styles, you always still have to put in that child's personality and temperament into the mix of attachment. My oldest will look sometimes in strange environments that she is not securely attached, but when if you go down and you look at the definitions of securely attached, it is there. But because it's an uncomfortable environment, doesn't quite look that way. So you have to make sure you're keeping into account the baby's temperament or personality as we're talking about attachment. Just because you have a child that's difficult to comfort does not mean they don't have a secure attachment. That can simply be their personality. So how this started was an experiment called Strange Situation, and they had a baby and a caregiver in a room, and then different things would happen. And what they did is they began to track over time with multiple caregivers and multiple babies who were together. They began to watch what would happen when the caregiver was present, the caregiver left, the caregiver returned. And so this is how they kind of basically came out with the 4 attachment styles. So here's secure attachment. And so think about this. This will be about 65% of the infants and the babies in your care. So when the caregiver is present, you're going to see that baby, if secure attachment is there, you're going to see that baby begin to kind of wander off. Now that might look back, but they're going to feel safe enough to explore around the classroom, explore around the room. And then they're going to make sure that caregiver, that secure base is there. If a caregiver leaves, they might cry, they might go to the door. But that distress is not panic. It's where did that person go? When the caregiver comes back, they're going to be pleased and they're easily comforted. They're pretty easy. They re-enter into that secure base and you'll see them start to go off and play. And then the child's behavior towards a stranger is you can see that sometimes that's okay, but they really want their caregiver back. The key part of all these slides that we're going to talk about is this caregiver response. So when we talk about if this is the baby that you have, then this is what you're seeing with a secure attachment. This is how a caregiver is typically responding to this baby. They respond quickly and consistently, and they see that this child wants comfort and security. They see that, that there's a confidence that that person is going to fulfill my needs. They're going to take care of me. So that baby just kind of knows. So that's secure attachment. Avoidant attachment. And so this is one very little interest in playing with others. They would rather play with an object, and they seem a little distant. So they're going to have an object. It's almost like they're attached more to the object than they are to a person. When the caregiver leaves, very little difference. They may see that caregiver leave, but there's not really a lot of distress. When the caregiver comes back, not a lot of reaction, and they may not even respond to that caregiver trying to get their attention. To a stranger, there's not really any difference. They will respond to their primary caregiver, and a stranger, pretty similar. Sometimes they even prefer the stranger. So this is kind of the caregiver response that you'll see when you have an avoidant attachment child. And so If that child is showing distress, so this is a pattern that for this child's life, the child has shown distress and the caregiver doesn't really respond. And that child learns from that lack of response by the caregiver, doesn't really mean anything if I cry. It doesn't really mean anything if I reach out and try to get your attention. So that child learns that there's not really a point in asking for help or asking for care. Ambivalent attachment is kind of the third one of the 4 attachment styles. When this is one you can kind of see this one. This is one that I tend to pick out pretty easily. Is the child's uncomfortable when that caregiver is present, that they already know that that person's going to leave. They're kind of anticipating when they're in a strange environment, they're already uncomfortable. They don't feel secure in that strange environment, even if their primary caregiver is there. They might want their attention and they might want that caregiver to be close to them, but you'll honestly see it's kind of that push-pull, where I want you here, but no, I really don't, because I know you're going to leave me anyway. So that's when the caregiver is present. When the caregiver leaves, usually you're going to see a very strong reaction. When the caregiver returns, it's very hard to comfort that child. That child just doesn't calm back down because they don't have a secure attachment to that caregiver. And sometimes you'll see it's a while before they can re-engage and play. So I want you to think about, if you're a child care provider, I want you to think about as these babies and infants come into your classroom. It's the reason that I did this. You're going to see this right here. You're going to see those babies that maybe they can just hand them to you and that baby is fine. You're going to see the ones that don't quite know what to do. And you're going to see the ones that they're anxious about the caregiver being there and the caregiver coming back. But this is what the caregiver's response of a baby with ambivalent attachment typically looks like. Here's part of that pattern. The responses occur on the caregiver's terms. That's why it's ambivalent. Is when the caregiver feels like paying attention to the child, they do. When they don't, they don't. That's why that child has such anxiety about the caregiver even being there, because they don't know, are you going to be here or are you not? They cannot rely on that person to fill their needs. So they just kind of don't know, I can cry one time and that person responds, and I can cry the next and it doesn't. So this is the fourth one, and there's 2 slides for this one. If you'll look at the picture, it kind of talks about disorganized attachment, kind of gives you a visual. It's with all of the other ones, there are some coping skills. Whether it's I attach to an object, whether I don't attach at all. So you have all those insecure attachments. The avoidant, why bother? Nothing's going to happen. The ambivalent is more along the lines of anger. And it's like, if I cry enough, if I'm loud enough, if I hold on enough, maybe she'll pay attention to me. But those are not true when it comes to disorganized attachment. In this one, it's the most disturbing one, because you're going to see babies who just seem very depressed. They're going to be they're just that freeze expression. They may show just that rocking back and forth, and they're trying to comfort themselves. This is typically one where there's more maltreatment. You're going to see in high risk. You're going to see in places that are have poverty, trauma after trauma, with alcoholic parents and abusive environments. And you're going to see that child just really cannot even find anything that helps them cope with the situation. So they really kind of learn just to shut down. And so they will go from complete shutdown to even, you'll see that just the screaming or the crying is just very different in these children. So one of the things I wanted you to really look at when it comes to infants and toddlers, this is different. There are a couple phrases that I could give you to talk about how to have attachment and attunement with a baby. And I'm hoping that you'll see with infants and toddlers, you're going to see the same 2 things: eye contact and touch. Eye contact and touch. So I'm going to go through some of them, and that's one of the, if I could put words up on nurseries and living rooms and child care centers. Those are the things that I really wish people would understand, how you form that attachment, how that attachment is formed as an infant is the foundation for every other relationship after. How you show that baby how to attune to you. And so when you think of attunement, think of like tuning in a piano. You know, you have to really know what that sound is, and you have to know what to do about it to really have attunement. So I wanted you to think about what the life of a baby is like. I want you to think about, you're in a crib, you know this is not good, you start crying, and you can do nothing about it. You have to wait till somebody does or doesn't come get you. You have to wait till that person comes get you to even decide, are they going to be gentle? Are they going to be mad at me? And if they're mad at me, I don't even know what I did. So they're picked up without explanation. They're put down without explanation. They finally get used to a person, and then for some strange reason, they are handed off to another person who can be good, bad, kind, not kind. The way that this hit home for me is after the hurricane, I stayed at my in-laws, so I was cooking in a different kitchen. I just got frustrated trying to find a spatula. I couldn't figure out, because it's not where I would put it. So just cooking in a strange kitchen. After the hurricane, I live in a camper. I never know where things are, because when you put it somewhere, there's only so much storage. And my husband's 6'3", so half the time it's really up tall. And I just get so frustrated because things aren't where they're supposed to be. So I want you to think about, that is what is going on in a baby's life, a toddler's life. They can be sitting on the carpet, content, and all of a sudden somebody comes up from behind them, picks them up under their arms, hopefully, and carries them off. They have no idea that was even coming. And it's just like, whoa, wait, I'm in the air. How am I in the air? And I have no idea what's happening to me. And so I want you to think about, just from that perspective of a baby and a toddler, that things are done to them all the time. And so I'm going to kind of go through the list, and I wanted you just to kind of play with it a little bit. I can make the list available for you, and I know they're recording this. We're just going to kind of go through it. I want you just to see just the eye contact and physical touch. So the first one, spending time holding them, play games, get a mirror out. Talk about, if you have a new person, a new babysitter, a new caregiver, it's going to take a little bit of time. Maybe just go spend some time in that room. Or if you're transitioning a teacher in and out, maybe let them find some familiarity. Look at how you can comfort that baby if they cry. You may not be able to immediately get to them. Let them hear your voice. Pay attention to the different cries. Think about all the soothing things that the baby can have. Respond to the coos, the babbling, the cries, the smiles. You know, if you'll look in that video, that mom was having such a beautiful conversation with that baby. You know, that baby would go, ooh, and she would ooh back. You don't have to have conversations and, you know, actually have words. You're speaking in that baby's language, and then that baby knows that's what attunement is all about. So here's some things for a toddler. You're going to see toddlers start to walk off and look back, start to walk off and look back. So all of these slides, we'll make it available for you to just some ideas for toddlers. This is going to talk about some of the things to do with trauma and recognize what stress means for them. There's a whole bunch of activity-based, attachment-based activities. And if you'll notice, that one says, put your phone away, just like in the video. So here, but the last slide that I want to really get to before we take questions is when to seek help for babies and toddlers after trauma. When they're slipping back in development. Now, you may see a pause. That's okay. Give it a little bit of time. See if it comes back. If that development slows down, think about, I'm going to give it a little bit of time. I'm going to try to work on attachment. I'm going to try to work on attunement. But if it's not going away, or if it's getting worse, you really need to potentially think about getting some professional help. And yes, there actually are people who do therapy with babies and toddlers. Typically, there's a caregiver and a parent involved. So if you feel like, even for you, the third bullet down talks about you. If something has gotten in the way of you getting to know your baby or the children in your care, you can seek help. The coalition has a free resource. You can talk to Donna, Emily, and them about free resources for counseling, for staff, for parents, for children. That is out there. And so you have to be that secure base for these children. And so if you don't feel you can, reach out and let's see what we can do. It's going to talk about all the things that you go on and even the loss of a home. So I'm going to let Donna see if there's any questions in there. If there's not, we'll go back to some of the activities, but we'll also make sure that you have access to these activities. But the biggest thing to remember is that it is eye contact and physical touch, which supports attachment and attunement in infants and toddlers.
Thank you, Denise. I'm looking through the chat box. If anybody has questions, they can send it through the chat box or the Q&A box. Denise is ready to answer any of your questions. Just go ahead. We'll give you a few seconds to put those chats in, or questions and answers. Denise, I'm going to start it out though, and then we can go back to the activities. We have a lot of families that typically are not home 8 and 9 hours a day with their baby. They're usually in a child care. But because of the restraints and the isolations that have been going on, that's where parents have been, which it makes it stressful for the parent that's not used to it. You think it would come natural, but it's like you have, when you're a working mom and then you're used to getting them at the child at 5 o'clock at night. Now you're home all day with these children, trying to do stuff that you're supposed to normally have done. Do you have any ideas or any strategies for a mom that typically is away from her child because of work duties, and now they're together 24/7?
The first piece of advice is even something that I've had to do is you're going to have to give yourself a break and understand that you cannot do both of these jobs. You cannot be the teacher, the child care provider, and the parent, and actually add another one, and the worker in some cases, all at the same time. You're going to have to understand that that is not a possibility, and to understand that you don't have the training on managing, 12 children at the same time, 5 children at the same time. But what you have is the ability to know that child. You already know what soothes. So the first thing is to give yourself a break. The second, what I would do is to really look at, is there a potential schedule that you can begin to keep that would help you and that child? Your child, if your child has been in childcare, or is already on a routine and already on a schedule once they hit a certain age. And so they kind of know. It may be reaching out to the childcare provider and saying, hey, what's a song that you guys sing? What's a book that you guys read? Bring in some of the ones that have spent a lot of time with your children and say, these are some things. If you can't get a hold of the childcare center, establish your own routines. Just my children, my middle daughter loved the book Goodnight Gorilla. We read it over and over and over and over to the point where, to be honest, I actually hid it for a couple of weeks. But that's okay. That book, that repetition is actually what's comforting. And so give yourself a break. See if, I know the younger the child, the harder the structure. I know it's really hard to have that schedule, but see if you can break it out into smaller pieces, and to understand that you have to be okay to be a secure base for a child. And it's hard because you may not feel like you're doing a good job as a parent. You may not feel you're doing a good job as a worker. You may be worried about bills and how to pay it, and even if you have a job, when this is over. So you're going to really have to look at, am I okay? And find some ways to be okay. There are lots of even support groups that are out here that you can get on and FaceTime, that you can have a break. We've looked at some of the things to be okay, and I can actually send that resource to the coalition, One of them is to take a shower, get dressed. Get dressed in clothes that you would normally wear. Take care of yourself. Eat some breakfast. Go outside. Find some activity. Really look strong at those things that were comforting to you before. I have a playlist on my phone that if I get upset, I can play that playlist. And some of them are ridiculous. One of my favorite songs, and y'all can judge me, go ahead and do it now, is Ice Ice Baby. I know y'all all just laughed at me. It is really hard to be upset when you're listening to Ice Ice Baby because we had that hair in the 80s and we danced like that. And so it's okay to have those emotions. Have a good plan for when you get overwhelmed. You know, on a 1 through 10, 10 means I have lost it. Get really good at what a 6 looks like and when you need to stop and go do some things for yourself.
Thanks, Denise. That's good to know. We've got to remember in the midst of all the children's stuff, we've got to care for ourselves. And I like what you said about know what your levels are. When you're at a 6, go ahead and start planning on taking care of yourself, taking care of your emotions. So there's no more questions that have come in at this time. Denise, did you say there's some more activities you could go over?
Yeah, so these are each slide has some baby ones, has some toddler ones. And it's in one of the ones that number 2 on this slide is kind of frustrating if you let your toddler help with some routine and self-care. Just go ahead and already think it's going to be funny. If you've ever had a child try to fold something or put something away, help brush their own teeth, you already know toothpaste is going to go everywhere. So go ahead and have just prepare to have some of these things. But give them some choices. You know, do you want red or blue? My mother used to work on an Alzheimer's unit, and they would have to call her at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And they would say, we can't get him to take his medication, or we can't get him to go, put his clothes on. And she would say, well, do you want to take your medication with juice or with water? And they would do it. And they never understood. You want to put your shirt on or put your pants on? Just even those small choices can help. And then give babies, start to give them emotions. You know, if you're happy and you know it, if you're sad and you know it, do all of those things. And then, even on the Legacy House website, I put some activities that you can do, and we'll send them and share those with the coalition. And so on here, there's going to talk about when you notice it, when you notice that there has been trauma, even if it's just trauma to you, that baby feels that. So start to look for, oh, I can see this coming. Look at soothing activities, find some songs, some music, look at how you can avoid separation from some of those important caregivers. Now take the break when you need to, but also to kind of look at those things. So here's just a couple of them. Put your phone away, get your silly on, find a way to just be silly. There's a song called Happy Dance. It's a great song. There's all the children's songs that really go back and play a little bit. That's definitely one of the things that's going to help you. Making a tunnel. It talks about looking in your eyes, but here's a couple of very specific ones. Do copycat, even the young babies. They make a face back at them. If they make a sound, make that sound back at them. Eye contact, smiles, laughs, that's all those things that you need to promote a healthy relationship or even repair an attachment. In therapy, what we say all the time, it's not what you do, it's what you do after what you did. So making repairs to a relationship, we do that all the time as adults. And so it's important sometimes to go, oh, I kind of messed up right then. Go ahead and give yourself some grace, give yourself a break because you're going to do it. And then go back and say, okay, I missed that, but I can fix that now. And it's so funny to watch this child. Probably the most important moments I've ever had with all 3 of my children is when I went back and I said, I'm sorry. I messed that one up. It was probably the thing that helped that attachment more, even when they were babies. Allie would throw herself on the floor and no, mine not. She wouldn't want to pick up anything. And as the child gets older with this mirroring, you can do it with jumping and playing with toys and facial expressions. Play a little bit of Simon Says and let them lead. All those things are some small things you can do. Beanbag game is actually one I do in therapy with infants and toddlers quite a bit, preschoolers, is you simply put a beanbag on top of their head and have them drop it into your hands, because they're going, look at the eye contact that requires. Just something that small is, you're going to watch that attunement and that attachment happen. And so it's simply take the beanbag, put it on top of their head, and have them see if they can bend their head down enough to drop it into your hands. It is the strangest activity with such a great response from the child. We do a lot of lotion. There's a therapy called TheraPlay, and I use it for adopted and children who've been adopted or in foster care. And it's simply putting putting lotion on their hands and feet and massaging it in. And at that moment, don't talk about grades, don't talk about chores, don't talk about anything. You're really just going to say, you know, talk about how their foot's like your foot or their hand is like your hand. Talk about all the sameness that you guys have together. Talk about, you know, their toe and what it feels like. So we're not going to bring in lessons. We're going to be present in that moment and really be attuned to that child. So it talks about piggyback rides, talks about brushing hair. That's kind of all those things. I know when my sister brushed my hair was very different than when my mom brushed my hair. My sister brushed my hair, I had about 3 hairs left. My mom did it, it was a little bit different and nurturing. So Donna, you let me know if you want me to continue or we're going to wrap it up.
Denise, we do have a comment
Okay.
From one of our panelists. It says that, okay, that's one of the best statements I've heard. It's not what you did, but what you do after you did what you did.
You know, when I had my first child, I had been around children with special needs pretty much since birth. I had babysat my entire life. I taught preschool my senior year. I went to school for early childhood. And after that, I graduated, I had my first child. And one of my favorite sayings, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan. I was sure I was going to be a wonderful mother. I really didn't want to be anything else. I went to school for early childhood just because I thought it'd help me be a better mother. So I have this child who did nothing but scream for 4 straight months. I did not know what to do with this baby. The only time this child was quiet is when she was in the back of a car going up and down I-10 in Tallahassee more than 30 miles an hour. I felt like a failure. And it took forever for that repair. And I know for sure at times I did not respond to her the way I should have. I did not give myself credit. I probably was very ugly to my husband at the time. You know, he looks back at it and laughs now. But after that, when I didn't do what I was supposed to do, or I messed up, I oopsed. Even as teenagers, I oopsed minutely. But I would go back and I would say, I'm sorry. Or I would make that eye contact. That's the best thing about infants and toddlers is they're so resilient. It's, you know, you can go back and look at that personality and then make those repairs. And those repairs for infants and toddlers, it's like we talked about the last time, they don't have 15 years of you messing up. They have 6 months of it, 2 months of it, a year of it. And then half the time, you're not even messing up. More than that, you're probably doing a great job. So give yourself credit for when you are doing a wonderful job and make the repairs for the times that you didn't. We are human. I used to laugh so hard. When my second child was born, I would try to rock her to sleep and rock her to sleep and rock her to sleep. And she's so different than her sister. All she wanted me to do was put her in her crib and leave her alone. So they don't come with instruction books. You are going to not get it right all the time. But the best thing is to be able to make those repairs, because that's when you're teaching them really about life, that you can mess up and go back, repair that relationship and move on and have even a stronger one.
Very neat. Thank you, Denise. I don't have any more questions or chats. So I appreciate the time that you have put into this. I know it's your life, your business, but you also have done this for the coalition and for our people that are out there that routinely just don't get this information. So we're very thankful and blessed that you've done this for us. Remember, those of you who are on the call, tell your friends and your family about next Tuesday at 12:30, the Perplexing Preschoolers. That's what Denise is going to be talking about. next week. So it's going to be a very exciting time. I've got a comment, great information. Thank you. That was from Tony, Denise. So,
Oh, thank you very much.
and you know what? Denise has just talked about being real. I don't know how many people, therapists, those kind of people talk about being real, but we have a lot of times messed up. And I know as a parent I have. And just to be real with your children and do that comment is not what you did, but what you do after you did what you did. It's some big words, but it makes a lot of sense. So thank you, Denise, for that. Thank you for everybody that was on the call. Denise mentioned some services that are free to families of the coalition. Families, I guess you'd say, those people that stretch out across the coalition. If you know of somebody, a child care teacher that's out there, they need an extra hand, they need somebody to talk to. We have a program. It's called, it's a mental health program, and the way to access it is the learning line at elcnwf.org. It goes directly to our inclusion specialist, and this is a request to be seen or talk to somebody like Denise or one of her colleagues at no cost to you. Now, right now, understandably, we have to do the telehealth or the phone conversations, but sometimes if you can just find a moment in your car or out in another room or a classroom of just some quietness where Denise could talk with you or her colleagues, just email learningline@elcnwf.org. If you know of somebody that needs some help, maybe they're just exhausted. They need to know that what they are doing is okay, or what they have done is okay, or what's the next steps, or what are some strategies, something to make me feel like I'm a real person throughout this COVID-19. Remember that those options are there. If you can't remember, call the coalition, get a hold of me, my email, get a hold of one of the coalition staff, and we can put you in touch with Denise and get that process started. So remember, learning line at elcnwf.org. We'll be sending out the registration on Friday through the Family Ties newsletter and the teacher blast, just specific for teachers. Both of those have the same link to COVID-19 through the eyes of a child for next week. And I think we are nearing the end. And I thank everybody that was on the call. Thank you, Denise. Thank you for ELC staff for being on the call with us. And thank you for all of you that take care of those children in this world. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.